Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. I hope all of you found my previous videos useful. Today's video is about procurement and tendering. In these videos we'll be covering the procurement process and different types of, as well as the tendering process and different types of that. Without further ado, let's get stuck in. So, what is procurement? Procurement is the overall act of obtaining goods and services from external sources and includes deciding a strategy on how those goods are acquired. This is done by reviewing the client's requirements, usually centering around cost, time, quality and risk. So what are the types of procurement you need to know about? The main types in construction are traditional, design and build, management contracting, construction management and frameworks. Let's start with traditional procurement. Traditional procurement separates the process into two steps. The first step involves employing consultants to develop the design in detail. They then estimate the cost of the works and decide who will be inspecting the works as they proceed. The next step is inviting the contractor who does the building work to tender for the project. So simply step 1 is design and step 2 is construction. It's called traditional because it's most often used in the history of UK construction. It's the traditional way of doing things. But does that mean it's the best? Well, let's look at the advantages and disadvantages of the traditional procurement process. The traditional procurement process ensures that the client has control over the design and that sufficient time is spent to develop what they want. It is accommodating of change and allows for greater cost certainty. What about the downsides? The main one is time. Due to the fact that the steps take place consequentially, it takes longer than, say, the design and build method, which we'll cover in a second. If the two steps are completed completely separate, then there's the risk that the design may not be buildable. This is because contractors may not be consulted at all. They then may not understand the requirements, or there may not be sufficient information for them to build the design. This can then lead to delay. Let's put a pin in that for now, and we'll move on to design and build. As the name suggests, in this method, a contractor is procured to design and build the project. All risk is allocated to the contractor. The client sets out the employer's requirements, and the contractor responds with the contractor's proposals. This will include costs. The idea behind this approach is to create a single point of responsibility. So what are the advantages of this method? The benefits of having a contractor involved at the earlier stages are numerous. There's the potential for them to advise on cost savings. Maybe they know of a cheaper way to meet the requirements and achieve the same quality. As mentioned also, this single point of responsibility would make it harder for the contractor to apportion blame if anything were to go wrong in the project. They would have to take responsibility for it. Due to the contractor being involved early on and having full control over the design and build process, this overlaps the design and construction phases that would usually be separated in the traditional method, which basically means things go quicker. And now for the downsides. There is a risk that if contractors are in control of the design, will tend to try and achieve the greatest profit margin while still meeting the employer's requirements. So this can be a risk to the quality of the project. They may do this through choosing cheaper materials than the best materials, for example. Another potential downside is that the client loses the ability to control the design, or at least with as much control as they would have had with the traditional procurement method. There is also a risk that the client may find it hard to develop a comprehensive brief for the project. Side note, if a client wants more control over the design using the design and build method, they may choose to novate the design obligations after the planning phase to the contractor. They can then have control over design up until this point. At this point then, the contractual obligations shift to the contractor to develop the design for the project. Next up is management contracting. Management contracting is where the client opts to employ the subcontractors using packages who are then contracted directly to a management contractor. The management contractor will use their expertise to assist and advise the client's decision making in this respect. The management contractor has a contractual bond with each of the subcontractors and is required to manage them throughout the pre-construction and construction phases of the project. This is really appropriate for large or complex projects where a single contractor may not possess all of the skills needed to deliver the requirements. So to solve this, parts of the project are packaged up and tendered individually to trades contractors. Together, this makes up the whole project. So what are the advantages of management contracting? Well, it actually balances the control over the design and the contractor input in design that traditional and design and build are usually polarised by. The architect still has control, but advice from the contractor on buildability is utilised early on in the project. This method reduces the cost of the works overall. This is also because a main contractor will price risk into a traditional bid and also into design and build. With no main contractor, in theory, this reduces the amount of risk that is priced in. Another benefit is that tendering the works separately allows for a faster start on site, as you can do them individually and sequentially. So the downsides are this method may not be suitable for inexperienced clients. This is because works usually begin before the nature of the completed project is known. This is because as you are tendering the works separately, they will start and finish separately. Not really a massive downside, but something that does need to be considered when advising clients on a procurement route. Another thing to consider is that collateral warranties will most likely be required for all of the subcontractors. This is because the subcontractors are in contract with the management contractor and not the client. They need to extend their liability to the client and maybe further depending on the nature of the project. Next up is something very similar to management contracting, so I won't dwell on it. Construction management. It's important to understand that they're very similar procurement methods, with the key difference being that the subcontractors are not in contract with the construction manager, but the client directly. This, as you would assume, apportions more risk to the client than with the management contractor route. Like management contracting, the construction manager is in place from early on in the project. They give advice on buildability of the architectural plans and designs. It's important to understand the different legal terminology that separates management contracting and construction management. The management contractor is acting as a principal, whereas the construction manager is acting as an agent to the client. The pros and cons are pretty much the same as management contracting. Last but not least, we have frameworks. Frameworks are used by clients who procure work of a similar nature on a regular basis across a number of different locations. These are in the form of call-on, call-off agreements with a number of different contractors for construction services over a period of time. Framework agreements will specify scope of the works expected and possible locations that the work will take place, as well as the contract conditions. A schedule of rates will usually be used to price the work. This schedule of rates will be agreed and negotiated early on to improve cost certainty. So what are the pros and cons? The pros include, frameworks are brilliant for flexibility. The reaction time between clients needing work to take place and it being able to take place is really fast. So less procurement time, faster starts on site, as the general scope of works is already agreed upon. Frameworks are great ways to build long-lasting relationships between clients and contractors. The more work that is done, the more the relationship develops. In theory, learning curves are cut short and greater understanding is achieved over time. This is the kind of collaboration that was envisaged by the theory in the Latham Report 1994. The cons are mainly felt by the contractors involved. This is in the way that the work that was suggested by being in a framework agreement with the client may never actually be delivered in the capacity that they had hoped. The Civil Engineering Contractors Association published research on this very matter in 2018. It's important to understand some of the recommendations of this report to get a sense of the downsides to frameworks. Once established, frameworks must be used by customers. Frameworks should deliver a specified minimum value of work. The number of companies on a framework should be proportionate. Customers should refrain from using multiple frameworks for greater flexibility. Framework operators should only consider the use of mini competitions if there is a clear commercial reason for doing so. And pre-qualification questionnaires for frameworks should adopt proposals being developed by the industry for a single industry standard approach. And that's all for today's episode on procurement and tendering, guys. Thanks very much for joining me. Next time we're going to take a look at the tendering processes and the different types of, just like we have looked at procurement today. By the end of this series, you should have a good understanding of procurement and tendering in construction. I really look forward to any feedback you have. And if you think I've missed anything or if you have any questions, please let me know down in the comments section below, as I'll be sure to be reading all of them. And it's important to remember that this is not professional advice, just a compilation of my own research. Thanks for watching. Consider giving this video a like if you enjoyed and subscribing if you would like to see more.